So the hardest part by far about using AI for ad creative is not adopting it in the first place. In fact, if you already have adopted it, then you have probably noticed that it works fairly well. The output is good, the tools work, but then when it comes to scaling that and scaling it across your entire organization or across multiple clients if you are an agency, that is where it typically breaks down. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of teams hitting a ceiling. They have systems that work, but as soon as they try to operationalize those systems, it ends up breaking. So in this video, I want to share with you 3 predictions that I have for what AI creative production will actually look like in 2026. Not just the tools, because of course, I think everyone knows that the tools are only going to get better, but how teams will operate, how the infrastructure will change, and what teams will need to do in order to scale their AI creative processes. So with that being said, let's dive into the video. So prediction number 1. Now, I am hugely a believer that one of the biggest things that we will see is the operationalization of AI creative. Now, I know that sounds like a fairly complicated word, but the biggest shift I believe in 2026 will not just be about the capabilities of AI. I truly believe it will be about operationalizing AI creative across a portfolio of different brands or across an entire organization. So right now, most teams that are getting their best results from AI are doing so in a fairly bespoke, one-off, custom way, as it were. They've figured out the prompts that kind of work well for their brand, that work specifically effectively on a one-off instance, and they have a workflow that their team understands. Maybe they've even built some sort of basic light automation around that. But the problem that I've seen is that that approach typically doesn't scale what I mean by horizontally. So recently I was speaking to someone that runs the creative system for around 20 brands, and this was the exact issue that this person had. When they were client side, they were able to build this entire system with systems like scraping Reddit, feeding that into Claude, tagging by ICP, and then generating scripts based on that, which worked effectively. But then on the agency side, with multiple clients, it's almost impossible to replicate it because there is no time whatsoever to be able to build these bespoke systems for every single client. And if you have team members that are on the more junior side, they don't even know how to operate what you've built in the first place. And this really is the bottleneck. And it is exactly the same whether you're an agency with multiple clients or whether you're a brand with multiple products, with multiple SKUs or with multiple departments. The issue is not the AI, it's the operationalization of the AI. So my prediction is that in 2026, the teams that win will be the ones that figure out how to almost templatize their AI creative infrastructure. So they have one system that really is able to flex across multiple different brands, different departments, different team members, and different structures, whether it's the same core workflow or a different workflow. But either way, there are going to be different inputs where you can plug in context, research, guidelines, and the system still runs. Now, in my opinion, the teams that still do this bespoke, brand by brand or department by department or use case by use case, at least in a one-off instance, are really going to struggle. They're going to be stuck in this continuous loop where basically every new project, task, client, whatever it may be, ultimately means rebuilding a system from scratch. And then of course, it's going to be almost impossible to keep up with the teams that have figured out how to turn everything in their AI ecosystem into an entire operation. So then prediction number 2 is something called self-healing creative systems. I truly believe we are going to see the emergence of what I'd call a self-healing creative system. Now, what I actually mean by that, because it sounds like a bit of a buzzword. So right now, most creative workflows are what I'd consider to be reactive. Let's say you have an ad account and one of your ads starts to fatigue. Someone internally will manually notice that process. They flag that the frequency is increasing or performance overall is declining, and they attribute that to creative fatigue. Then someone else in the business, in the organization, in the workflow, whatever it may be, they then have to take that information and go ahead and create a replacement. They can brief it, they can produce it, get it approved and uploaded. And yes, that can be done by AI. People may be building systems whereby they can just use AI to generate the brief and then the entire production process. But with this process still, by the time that ad is now live, you've already lost days, maybe even weeks of performance. And the teams that are ahead of this and the teams that I truly believe are going to dominate in 2026, they are already thinking about how they can close that loop automatically. Now, especially if you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on paid ads, even a day or two of spending on a fatigued ad is going to cost you a lot of revenue, but also a lot of potential missed revenue too. Now, just last week, I was speaking to someone who described, exactly what he wanted to build. And what this looked like was automated fatigue detection. So then when an ad crosses a certain threshold, whether that's frequency, whether that's CPA, ultimately whatever metric internally you're able to use to determine frequency increase or fatigue, it then triggers that workflow. And this would be any type of workflow, but typically, for example, a workflow that generates fresh new creative based on what's been working. So then that creative goes through an entire automated process, including the QC as well, and then is automatically uploaded back into the ad platform. So there is literally zero human intervention or manual intervention whatsoever in this process, in this loop. There is a human that oversees this loop for sure to ensure that it actually works, but it's fundamentally a different way of operating because in ad fatigues, the workflow is automatically triggered, a new brief is written, a new script is written, the ad is generated, QC'd, and uploaded into that ad account to replace that fatigued ad before it even has, literally within a couple of hours. And my prediction is that this will become the standard for teams that are scaling in 2026. And it's not even because the technology is new. There is the ability to be able to build this today without a doubt using N8N, Gumloop, and obviously the APIs that exist. It's just that most teams haven't really made the shift mentally because they are still considering themselves and thinking of themselves as the operators rather than the architects. Now, the role of these creative strategists will change fundamentally in general, but also with this model because you are no longer making the ads. You are essentially designing the architecture and designing the systems that then go ahead and make the ads for you. You're setting the parameters, you're setting the guardrails, the quality thresholds, and then you're just basically monitoring and optimizing the system itself. So then prediction number 3 is we will see compounding systems. The gap, in my opinion, between teams that have compounding systems and teams without is going to become exponentially massive in 2026. So here's what I mean by compounding. So to give you and kind of like paint a picture here, most AI creative workflows right now are what I'd consider to be linear. So in other words, you do research, you create a brief, you then go and produce that creative and launch that creative and maybe look at the performance data, manually feed that back into the next round, whatever it may be, share the insights with your media buying team or your brief creation team or your strategist so that the next round of what they build is based on that. Even though that is an effective workflow, it's still linear and it's not compounding. It's essentially just iteration with a few extra steps. Now, to my definition, a compounding system is essentially one where the performance data automatically feeds back into the research layer. So then as a result, every single ad that you produce and every single ad that you run essentially makes the next batch smarter and increases the likelihood of the next batch working even more effectively. So then the system essentially learns what hooks work for which different audiences, which angles resonate best, which format performs well, and obviously that knowledge not only compounds back into the brief creation process, but also gets embedded into the actual infrastructure rather than being stuck in someone's head. So then the AI itself learns exactly what that winning format looks like. Now, I've been speaking to a lot of brands recently, as I've already kind of mentioned in this video, but another example of this recently is that I was speaking to a company a couple of weeks ago and they were producing hundreds and hundreds of assets every single week. They had a very, very structured process, kind of typically, the same pattern with regards to what the process looked like. So research, briefs, production, review, upload into the ads manager. But the question they had for me was, how do we make this process smarter? And this was a really interesting question because I've been asked this a few times, but most people typically ask, like, how do we make this faster? Not many people ask, how do we make that smarter? And honestly, this is the right question. And to me, this was the biggest indicator that this is a brand that knew exactly what they were talking about and had serious intention for scale this year. Because the thing is, if your system isn't compounding, I kind of compare this to the analogy of just like running on a treadmill. You end up producing more, but you're not getting better. And then you start back from scratch every single month, roughly the same place at least. But when you have a system that compounds, you are building on everything that you've learned. So the research that you produce gets better, it gets sharper because you have more data. The briefs get tighter, they get easier to read for your designers or the AI, or they become more in line with what you're looking for. The production hit rate increases, of course. Now, over the course of 12 months, that is a massive, massive difference. These small wins iterate, and the difference becomes enormous in terms of how effective the AI system is as a whole. And my prediction is that by the end of this year, by the end of 2026, the teams that have built these compounding systems will again be operating at a completely different level, and the gap will be, almost impossible to close. And it's not just because they are ahead, but they are ahead and still accelerate. Now, this literally just reminds me of the graph that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, where basically if you are 1% better every single day, 1.01 to the power of 365 ends up being significantly higher, a number by the end of the year, compared to 0.99 to the power of 365. And honestly, this process here is literally exactly the same here, because you are benefiting from these small increases from leveraging the power of data and pulling that back into your system, so that the system becomes 1% better every single day, which means over the course of a year, you're going to be looking at a system that is exponentially better and more effective than basically any other brand are running. So in terms of how team structures will change, because I wanted to dive into this as well, what this actually means for how teams operate on a day-to-day basis, assuming these 3 shifts play out. I'm assuming they will. These are my predictions, and I'm pretty confident that, to remind you, there will be this operationalization across portfolios, there will be these self-healing systems, and there will be this kind of compounding approach to infrastructure. As a result of that, of course, the team structure will have to change. So I think, first of all, you're going to see the rise of what I'd call AI infrastructure roles, where you have these people whose job isn't even to make creative, it's literally to build and maintain the systems that make creative for them. And obviously this is very, very different from a typical creative strategist, because it's more like an operations role, but for AI workflows. And I think there's going to be a huge shift towards more of the roles that are typically creative roles are actually going to become operational roles, because it's going to be more valuable to have someone that can understand how to build something that produces creative, rather than a creative person itself. And I think that is going to be someone who understands the automation, someone that understands the tools, someone that understands the data, the APIs and so forth, and can essentially keep everything running. Also, I think the creative strategist role itself will fundamentally become more strategic, as it's intended to be, and less execution focused. So you're no longer going to see these creative strategists that are briefing individual ads. They're going to be basically designing the parameters that the system is built on and used to generate the briefs and the statics and the videos and so forth. They're going to be analyzing patterns across hundreds and hundreds of ads to figure out what to double down on. And just in general, I believe they're going to be thinking more in terms of systems rather than assets and creative first, as it were. I think thirdly, QC is going to become a lot more automated rather than manual. So right now, 99% of teams at least have manual humans individually reviewing every single piece of AI output before that goes live. And, I don't need to tell you that obviously that doesn't scale. And I think in 2026, you will see more teams building these AI-powered automated QC systems into their workflow, where you essentially have AI checking against AI to check the brand guidelines, the quality thresholds, requirements for any compliance. The human will still review, exceptions here and there, but they just won't be reviewing everything. And I think that's the key difference. And then fourth, I believe the feedback loop between the media buying process and the creative process will get much, much tighter. So right now, in a lot of teams, these often are fairly separated. So we have different teams for different workflows, one for media buying, one for the creative process. But when you have a system that is compounding a lot more, the performance data, it has to flow directly into the creative infrastructure. The media buyer, their individual personal insights can't just, sit in their head or a spreadsheet somewhere or written down. They have to be literally embedded into the system, because ultimately the effectiveness of the ads is going to be as a result of the effectiveness of the creative, which is going to be informed by the data that the media buyer then provides. So then what I want to leave you with today is this. Everything I've just described as I kind of outlined, it's literally buildable today. It's buildable already. All of these tools exist. It's not a technology problem. The reason why most teams don't have this in place is because they simply, haven't prioritized it. And I really want to kind of focus on the fact and leave this with you, as I said. Most teams are still in what we call execution mode. They are producing the ads, they're launching the campaigns, and still ultimately they're fighting fires and they're very much reactive. And the build of the infrastructure just constantly gets delayed and pushed back to the next quarter and then the next quarter. But the teams that are building an AI creative engine right now are going to have an extreme advantage. And every single company that I've spoken to, spending $100K a month or more, up to a couple of $100,000 a day in ads, are all prioritizing doing this because they know that once the system is built, once it's running, you are then competing on a completely different operational model to every other business, because you're able to churn out hundreds and hundreds of unique creatives every single day. So my advice, and yes, of course, this is obviously fairly self-serving, but I do believe it's true, is to invest as much time and effort now into building the infrastructure. And ultimately, this will give you the ability to get ahead if you're playing in a long-term game at least, so that by the end of the year, you're able to leverage those compounding effects and be able to produce hundreds and thousands of unique creatives, basically on autopilot, and build a massive advantage over the businesses that haven't. So with that being said, if you are a business and you are spending over $25K a month on your paid ads, or you run an agency and you serve clients that are around that level, building this infrastructure, is exactly what we do here at Studio Flow. We install bespoke custom AI systems designed around your exact workflow. We build and install them into your business so that you can run them, and they allow you to produce thousands and thousands of fully on-brand AI assets. And we even produce the first 100 ads for you with the system so that you get real ads that you can launch and test in the first few weeks. So if you would like to learn more about what this looks like, there is a link in the description below where you can book a call with me and my team. We will get on the call and we will just walk you through what this would look like specific to your situation and essentially see if it would be a fit. But with that being said, as always, really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you have got this far, leave a comment below if you found value from this, and also feel free to leave a comment if you didn't. Either's fine with me. Either way, feedback is going to be appreciated. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video.